They walked in like it was nothing, like I wasn't even human. I was just a girl, barely 12, taking a bath in a rusty old tub in the back room of our house. The water had gone lukewarm, and I remember humming to distract myself from the creaks of the old wooden floors outside the door. But when the knob turned, and both of them stepped inside my father first, then my brother, I knew something was terribly wrong. The way they looked at me, it wasn't love, it wasn't family, it was hunger. That was 67 years ago, but I can still smell the mildew of that bathroom, still feel the sting of shame and the cold grip of fear tightening in my chest like it was yesterday. My name is Mary Johnson. I'm 79 years old now. I live in Seaside, Florida, in a quiet white cottage that faces the water. From the outside, I suppose I look like any other old woman in town, a soft gray bun, knit shawls on the porch, a hummingbird feeder hanging by the window. But inside, I carry stories that most folks wouldn't believe, or worse, wouldn't want to. You see, when you're born into darkness, you don't know it's darkness. Not at first. Not until you see light for the first time. And for a long, long time, I didn't even know that what was happening to me was evil. It was just life. It was home. I was born in 1946 in a small rural town in the Florida Panhandle, not far from where I live now. My parents, Richard and Nancy Johnson, were strict religious folk. At least, that's what they claimed to be. My father worked odd jobs, construction, fishing, sometimes car repair, and he was gone most days, which was always a relief to me and my mother. When he was home, the air grew tense. Even the furniture seemed to hold its breath. My older brother, Caleb, was 5 years ahead of me and already treated like the heir to my father's legacy, whatever that meant. He copied Dad in everything: his walk, his gruff voice, his cruelty. If I dropped a dish, Caleb would be the first to scold me, even hit me. My mother would wince but say nothing. Her eyes always looked tired, like she hadn't had a full night's sleep since I was born. For the first few years, I was what you might call a quiet, gentle child. I kept to my room. I read books when I could get them. I helped Mama cook and wash, even though the house was falling apart. Our bathroom was just a converted storage closet with a clawfoot tub that never quite drained right. And that's where it happened. That was the room where my soul cracked for the first time. That night, when they came in, I remember reaching for a towel, begging them to get out. My brother just laughed. My father didn't say a word. He just locked the door behind him. And in that moment, I stopped being a daughter. I stopped being a sister. I became prey. I won't tell you all the details now. Not yet. You'll understand why I have to ease into it. But what I will tell you is this: when a child is betrayed by the very people who are supposed to protect her, something breaks. Something gets buried so deep that most people spend the rest of their lives trying to dig it out. Some never do. For a long time, I didn't think I would either. But this is not just a story of pain. This is a story of surviving the unthinkable, of finding small rays of light in the darkest corners, of reclaiming your name when others tried to erase it. I never thought I'd tell the full truth. Not at my age. But maybe someone out there, a girl, a woman, an old soul like me, maybe she needs to hear it. Maybe she's waiting to know that someone else made it out. If that's you, darling, then keep listening, because I'm about to tell you everything. Growing up in northern Florida in the late 1940s, life moved slow, heavy, like the swampy summer air that clung to your skin and didn't let go. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road outside a town no one talked about unless they were from it, and even then, mostly in whispers. The house was small and creaky, with chipped paint on the front porch and shutters that banged in the wind like they were trying to escape. We didn't have much. Daddy worked with his hands some weeks as a mechanic, others as a crab fisherman, sometimes roofing houses when storms rolled through. Whatever brought cash, even if it came soaked in sweat or shame. Mama stayed home. She cooked, cleaned, and waited, always waiting on payday, on supper, on Daddy's mood to shift from storm to calm. My mama's name was Nancy. She was a woman made of soft corners, quiet eyes, thin wrists, always folding her hands when she spoke. I think she tried to protect me in her own way, but the truth is, she was afraid of Daddy, of Caleb, of making things worse, and so she smiled through it all, like a ghost that hadn't realized she was already gone. Our home had no laughter, not the kind that fills a room and makes you feel safe. Caleb, my older brother, was 5 years ahead of me in age, but a lifetime apart in spirit. By the time I was 6, he had already learned how to make others small. I'd watch him stand beside Daddy, the two of them spitting tobacco onto the ground and smirking like they knew a secret I'd never be old enough to understand. He'd catch frogs just to tear them apart. He once dangled my kitten over the well in our backyard just to make me cry. And when Mama scolded him, which wasn't often, Daddy would storm in and yell at her for raising him soft. So she stopped trying. I became the quiet one, the shadow. I found little corners of peace in books, old magazines Mama brought home from the church, and the woods behind our property. I talked to trees more than people. They listened better. There were no birthday parties, no bedtime stories. When I asked Daddy once if I could have a doll, he snapped, "You got 2 hands, don't you? Make one out of rags." And I did. I named her Sarah. She had button eyes, one leg shorter than the other, and she slept under my pillow every night until Caleb took her and tossed her into the fire to see how fast rags burned. By the time I was 9, I knew how to cook a full breakfast, scrub floors on my knees, and keep my mouth shut. Daddy didn't tolerate sass, and Caleb was always nearby, waiting for me to slip up so he could tattle and earn praise. Their bond was ironclad, father and son, man and man, united in a world where I was nothing more than an afterthought. I remember Mama once telling me, "Just be small, baby, be quiet and stay out the way." It broke my heart even then. She didn't say, "Be strong." She didn't say, "You deserve better." She said, "Be small." So I did. I shrank myself into silence, into chores, into corners of rooms. I walked on eggshells so fragile, I could hear them crack under my breath. I tried not to cry because Daddy hated crying. He said it made me weak. Caleb would mimic me, scrunching his face up like a baby, then laugh as if I were something pathetic to watch. By the time I turned 11, I had developed early for my age. I didn't fully understand what was happening to my body, only that Daddy's eyes lingered longer. Caleb's shoulder brushes became less accidental. The bathwater felt colder. The doors seemed thinner. There were no lessons about womanhood in our house, no talks about changes, no comforting arms, just shame. Shame for bleeding, shame for growing, shame for being a girl in a home that wanted no such thing. I'll never forget the day I asked Mama why I had started bleeding between my legs. She looked at me like I'd just committed a sin, pulled me into the kitchen, and whispered, "Don't ever let your father see that," as if my body was a threat. As if the blame would fall on me. It was during that year, my 12th, that the worst of it began. Before that, there had been looks, threats, uncomfortable touches that could be passed off as accidental. But soon, even the pretending would stop. One evening, after dinner, I had just finished sweeping the kitchen. Mama had gone to lie down with a headache. Daddy and Caleb sat outside drinking beer, watching the sun go down, and I was told to go take a bath. I did as I was told. I always did. That was the rule. And that night, everything changed. But that story, the one where the door opened and I lost something I'd never get back, that comes next. It started in pieces. A lingering glance from Daddy at the dinner table. Caleb brushing past me in the hallway, just a little too close. The way their voices lowered when they said my name, like they were tasting it rather than calling me. I was 12, still more child than woman, but my body was changing. And in that house, that was all the invitation they thought they needed. One morning, I was washing laundry behind the house when Caleb came out barefoot, carrying nothing but a smirk. He leaned against the clothesline post, watching me bend and scrub. I tried not to look up, but I could feel him. "You're starting to look like Mama used to," he said. I didn't know what that meant, but it made my skin crawl. I picked up the wet shirt and walked away. That night at supper, Daddy asked me to stand up. "Let me see if you're growing right," he said. Mama's fork froze midair. Caleb chuckled. I stood there in front of them, face burning, barely breathing. Daddy nodded slowly. "Keep eating your greens," he said, like I was a hog being readied for show. I stopped eating that week. At night, I'd push my dresser against the door. It didn't stop much, but it gave me seconds. Seconds I could use to hide, to pray, to brace. I started sleeping fully dressed under my blanket, my shoes tucked beneath the bed. I kept Sarah, the rag doll I had sewn years before, clutched to my chest like she was a shield. But Caleb had burned her months ago. I was hugging nothing but air. Mama saw. She had to. The way I flinched when Daddy touched my shoulder. The way I cried without making a sound. Once, she caught me washing the same clothes twice, just so I didn't have to go inside. She didn't scold me. She just said, "Don't be late for supper," and walked away. Maybe she thought ignoring it would make it stop. Maybe she thought silence was safety. One afternoon, I came home from school and the door was locked. I stood there barefoot on the porch, books in hand, until Daddy opened it with a scowl. "You're late," he said. "I stayed after to help Miss Brooks with the library," I replied. He slapped me so hard my ears rang. "You think you can just go wherever you want. Think you're grown." Now I fell to the floor, head spinning. He hovered above me. "Maybe it's time you learn what grown girls are for." That was the first time he said it out loud. The first time the veil dropped completely. And I knew I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't being dramatic. I was in danger. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor by the window, with my knees pulled to my chest, praying anyone would see me. Miss Eleanor Brooks, my 7th grade teacher, was the only adult who ever truly looked me in the eyes. She once held me back after class and said gently, "Mary, if something ever feels wrong at home, you can tell me." I wanted to tell her, God, how I wanted to, but I was terrified of Daddy, of Caleb, of Mama, who would pretend not to know, of the sheriff, who was Daddy's cousin and drank coffee with him every Sunday, of what would happen if I spoke and no one listened. But something inside me started to shift. The fear was still there, but so was a quiet fire. One night, I was bathing quickly in the tub when I heard the doorknob rattle. I had locked it. "Mary," Caleb said through the door, his voice low and lazy. "I left my jacket in there." "There's no jacket," I answered, panic rising. "You sure?" I didn't reply. The knob shook harder. Then came Daddy's voice. "Open it. Now." I held the doorknob with both hands, heart pounding. "I'm not done. Don't make me come through, girl." I knew that tone. It meant pain. I wrapped the towel around me, yanked open the door, and bolted past them both, dripping water down the hallway as I ran to my room and slammed the door. I wedged my school books under the doorknob, sat shaking all night. Mama never came to check on me. By then, I had stopped speaking much at school. Miss Brooks pulled me aside again and gently placed her hand over mine. "Mary," she said, "you don't have to carry everything alone." I looked at her and whispered, "Sometimes home ain't safe." Her face changed. She nodded, and from that moment on, she started watching me closer. But things at home got worse. Daddy and Caleb became more careless, more aggressive. Their threats weren't whispered anymore. They didn't knock, and Mama still said nothing. I tried writing down what happened. I tore out pages from my notebook and buried them in the woods, under the old pine tree where I used to read. They found one. Caleb held it up at the table and laughed. "What's this? You writing stories now?" He read it aloud. My words, my fear. Daddy turned to me and said, "You like lying. Girl, I'll show you what happens to liars." That night, I was locked in the tool shed with no blanket, just the sound of frogs and distant thunder. I curled up on a pile of old rags and cried until I had no more tears. Something inside me cracked open that night. Not in a way that made me break, but in a way that made me burn. I wasn't safe. I wasn't protected. And I knew then if I wanted to live, I'd have to save myself. It was a Friday night. The sky outside had gone a strange kind of still, like it was holding its breath. I remember that detail, oddly enough, the silence before the storm. Mama had gone to visit a cousin in the next town, something about her sister's blood pressure flaring up. She packed her overnight bag and left right after supper. I stood at the porch, watching her taillights disappear down the dirt road, my stomach churning. That left me alone with them. I was 12, barely old enough to spell menstruation, let alone understand what a predator truly was. I'd hoped maybe Daddy would drink himself to sleep in the recliner, and Caleb would sneak out to meet one of the town girls. But luck wasn't something I had in those days. "Go wash up," Daddy said after he finished his beer. He didn't look at me when he said it. I hesitated. He looked up. "You deaf, girl." I nodded and went to the bathroom, moving slow, dragging my feet as if stalling might somehow delay what was already coming. I closed the door and turned the rusted faucet. Water sputtered from the pipes, cloudy and cold, eventually warming. I poured a scoop of homemade lye soap into the tub. The air filled with the sharp scent I used to love. Not anymore. I stripped my clothes in silence. My knees were scraped from cleaning the floor earlier that day. My fingers were sore from shelling peas. My body ached the way it always did, like it had lived too long in fear, even if it was still small and young. I slid into the water and tried to breathe. For a moment, there was peace. I sank down until the water touched my chin, closed my eyes, and imagined a different world, one where bathtubs were for bubbles, not hiding, one where towels were warm and waiting, and doors stayed closed when you locked them. Then the knob turned. I had locked it. I knew I had, but I heard a soft click, like someone using a butter knife to slide the latch. The door creaked open. Daddy stood there first, Caleb right behind him. I clutched my arms around my chest, water sloshing. "Please," I whispered. "Don't be stupid," Daddy said. "We just need to talk." My eyes darted to the door behind them, but there was nowhere to run. Caleb stepped in and closed the door slowly behind him. I backed further into the tub, water nearly spilling over. My voice shook. "Don't. I won't write out the rest, not in full, because there are some things too ugly for the page, too cruel for the ear." I remember the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder, pushing me down into the water as I screamed. I remember Caleb's breath close to my face, laughing like it was a joke. I remember choking on soap. I remember the sound of my heart breaking. When it was over, I lay curled up in the tub like a broken doll. My lip was bleeding, my wrists bruised. My towel had fallen to the floor, untouched, like it had given up too. They left the room like nothing had happened, like they had just changed a light bulb or fetched a wrench. I stayed there for hours, the water turning cold, my skin wrinkling and trembling. I didn't cry, not right away. It was like my body knew the crying wouldn't help. Eventually, I got out, dried myself with the curtain because I couldn't bring myself to touch the towel they had stepped over. I put on the cleanest clothes I could find, then crawled into the corner of my room, not the bed, and wrapped myself in a quilt Mama had sewn when I was 6. The next morning, the world spun like nothing had changed. Caleb whistled in the kitchen while frying eggs. Daddy sat reading the local paper, legs crossed like a gentleman. When I walked in, Daddy looked at me and said, "Sleep okay?" I didn't answer. I just stood there. Caleb smiled. "You're real quiet this morning, Mary." I sat down because I didn't know what else to do. I stared at the salt shaker and counted to 100 over and over, just to keep from screaming. Later that afternoon, Mama came back. I ran to her, hugged her tight. She stiffened, confused. "What's gotten into you?" she asked. I didn't answer, just clung to her, but she noticed the bruise on my wrist that night. She asked where it came from. Before I could speak, Daddy stepped in. She tripped in the shed, told her to clean it up, and she dropped a bucket. Mama looked at me. My eyes pleaded, but she looked away. "Be careful next time," she said softly. And just like that, it was sealed. The silence, the denial, the hell I would now live in day after day. The next few weeks blurred. It happened again and again, not always in the same way, not always in the same room. Sometimes it was Caleb alone, sometimes Daddy, sometimes both. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I started pulling out my hair in clumps in the middle of the night. I scratched my skin until it bled, just to feel like it still belonged to me. One day at school, I fainted. Miss Brooks sent me to the nurse, who called Mama. That evening, Daddy beat me for embarrassing the family. Caleb watched from the hallway, arms crossed, grinning. I remember lying in bed that night, staring up at the cracks in the ceiling, and thinking, this is how girls die. Not all at once, but piece by piece, and I know I would have, if not for a woman named Diane Whitaker. But I'll tell you about her soon. Because the night she knocked on our door, that was the night everything began to change. After that first night, my world collapsed into something unrecognizable. There was no safety, no escape. My body stopped belonging to me. I was just a vessel for their power, their anger, their sickness. It didn't matter if I was washing dishes, folding laundry, or lying in bed pretending to sleep any time could become their time. Every knock on the wall, every footstep in the hallway sent a jolt through me like electricity. I lived in a permanent state of fear. No one noticed, or maybe they did and simply chose not to. The worst part wasn't always the violence. It was the silence that wrapped around it like a blanket. The world kept spinning. Caleb still went to school like nothing happened. Daddy still nodded at the neighbors, still shook hands with the pastor on Sundays, still waved at the mailman with a smile. Mama, she drifted further away from me. She cooked dinner. She sewed curtains. She hummed to herself in the kitchen while my soul was falling apart 5 feet away. There were moments when I thought she'd say something. Once, she walked in right after it had happened. I was curled on the floor in the corner of the living room, still trembling, my skirt twisted, my lip bleeding. She paused. She looked down at me, and then she turned, walked out, and closed the door behind her. I think something inside her had broken 2 years ago, long before me. Maybe she thought pretending was the only way to survive. But I didn't want to survive like that, not if it meant becoming a ghost in my own skin. I stopped brushing my hair. I stopped speaking at all, at school. I was mute. The other girls whispered about me in the hallway. She's weird, they'd say, creepy quiet. Only Miss Brooks seemed to notice the difference between strange and hurting. She began calling me in after class, pretending to ask about homework. She'd sit beside me and ask questions softly. Are you safe? Mary, I couldn't answer, even if I wanted to. The words got stuck, because I knew that if I told, they'd come for me again, harder, meaner. And worse, they might not believe me. One time I almost told her. We were sitting under the big magnolia tree outside school. She'd brought me lemonade and a sandwich, and for a brief moment, I felt human again. She asked, "Do you want me to talk to someone?" I said. "I don't think anyone would listen." She didn't push. She just nodded. "I believe you," she whispered. "Whenever you're ready." But I wasn't ready. Not yet. At home, Caleb grew bolder. He started calling me his girl when no one else was around. "Daddy can have his turns," he said, "but you're mine now." It made me sick. I threw up constantly. Once in the middle of class, the nurse thought it was a stomach bug. I'd wake up at night soaked in sweat, scratching at my skin like something was crawling inside me. Sometimes, I banged my head against the wall to make the thoughts stop. I started writing letters I never mailed, to God, to myself, to Mama. In one of them, I wrote, "If I die tonight, let someone find this. Let them know it wasn't my fault." I buried that letter in a tin box behind the well, but even the earth felt indifferent. One day, in late spring, Daddy caught me hesitating before going to the bathroom. He stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "You scared?" he asked, almost like it amused him. I nodded. He smiled. Then he grabbed my arm and yanked me forward. "Ain't nothing in there but water and walls," he said. "It's you who makes it dirty." I started crying. He slapped me hard across the mouth. "Don't start that now. You want to cry 'cause you're alive. Ungrateful girl." That night, I snuck into the shed and found an old rusty knife tucked behind a box of nails. I held it to my wrist for an hour, staring at the blue veins like they were escape routes. I didn't press, not yet, but I made a deal with myself. If nothing changes in 1 week, I'll do it. On the 3rd day of that week, something happened. Mama was out getting groceries. Daddy was drunk by noon. Caleb had come into my room, forced himself on me again, and left laughing. I lay in bed, bleeding, shaking, broken. Then there was a knock at the front door. I didn't get up, didn't care. Let it be the devil himself, I thought. But the voice that followed was soft, warm. Mary, it called. My heart stopped. Mary Johnson. My name's Diane. I live down the road. Are you all right? Honey. That was the first time anyone had asked me that outside school. I didn't answer, but she didn't leave. She stayed on the porch for over an hour. I listened to her footsteps, to her breathing. She even sang a hymn once. It sounded like Mama used to sound before she gave up. That night, I wrote another letter to Diane. I slipped it between two loose boards on the porch. I didn't sign it. I just wrote, "Please come back. I think I'm dying in here." And she did. She came back every day. And one day, she didn't come alone. The next morning, I heard the knock again, but this time it was firmer, louder. Then came a woman's voice, clear and confident. "Mary, it's Miss Diane. I brought someone with me today." I froze. I was in the kitchen, cleaning the same counter I had wiped 3 times already just to stay busy. Daddy stirred in his chair, blinking through a whiskey haze. Caleb looked up from the newspaper. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, standing. I didn't answer. I just kept wiping. Then came another knock and a second voice. This one wasn't warm. It was official. "My name is Deputy Sarah Fields with the Walton County Sheriff's Office. We'd like to speak to Mary Johnson." Daddy shot up, knocking over his beer. "What is this about?" he shouted. But before he could reach the door, Diane pushed it open. She wasn't big, but she had that kind of presence that made men hesitate. She stepped inside like she owned the air. Right behind her came the deputy, a woman, sharp-eyed, hand resting near her belt. "Richard Johnson," the deputy asked. "Yeah, that's me. And Caleb Johnson." Caleb didn't answer. He was already backing toward the hallway. "We've received reports concerning the welfare of your daughter, Mary. We'd like to speak with her alone." I stood there, sponge still in hand. My heart pounding so hard I thought it would knock the salt shaker off the counter. Daddy stepped forward, but Diane raised a hand. "Don't, not another step," she said. The deputy nodded. "If you interfere, Mr. Johnson, you will be placed under arrest for obstruction. For the first time in my life, I saw my father pause. I dropped the sponge. It hit the floor with a dull thud. I looked at Diane, then at the deputy, and then back at Daddy. And I said, quietly but clearly, "I'll go." I walked toward the door without looking back. I could feel Caleb's eyes on me, burning. But I didn't stop. Not this time. Outside, Diane put a hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. The deputy opened the car door. I slid into the back seat and exhaled so deeply I nearly collapsed. They didn't take me straight to a police station. Instead, they drove me to a small beige building with a garden out front and a cross hanging gently above the door. The Walton Women's Shelter. My new home. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and something else, hope. Maybe. A soft voice greeted me, and soon I was sitting on a worn blue couch, holding a warm cup of tea I could barely lift because my hands were shaking too much. A counselor named Anita sat beside me. She didn't push, didn't prod. She just said, "When you're ready." And for the first time, I told her everything. The bathroom, the bruises, the nights in the shed, the things they said, the way Mama looked away. Anita cried quietly as I spoke. When I finished, she held my hand and said, "You're not alone anymore. Mary, that night, I slept in a real bed with clean sheets that smelled like fabric softener. No footsteps in the hallway, no locks on the door, no monsters in the next room. I was safe, not healed, Not yet, but safe. The next few weeks were a blur of questions, exams, interviews. Detective Sarah Fields returned often. She was patient, kind, angry on my behalf in a way I didn't expect. She brought in Miss Brooks, who turned over a worn notebook filled with years of classroom notes. Unusual bruises, withdrawn, sudden weight loss. She said, "Home ain't safe." It was all there, and it mattered now. They arrested Daddy first, then Caleb, 2 days later. I was told Mama was questioned, but nothing came of it. She claimed she didn't know. Sarah told me. I didn't argue. I didn't even cry. I just said she chose not to. A court date was set. I'd have to testify. I was terrified. But Diane came every day to see me. She brought me journals, art supplies, peppermint candy, and even a stray cat that had shown up at her door. "He's got a crooked tail," she said. "Figured you'd understand crooked things." I named him Charlie. He slept beside me every night. The night before my testimony, Diane sat with me in the garden behind the shelter. "You don't have to be brave all at once," she said. "You just have to keep choosing truth, even when it's hard." And I did. The next day in court, I sat on the witness stand and told a room full of strangers what had been done to me by the people who shared my blood. The room was silent. Then the judge said, "Thank you, Miss Johnson." That was the first time anyone had ever thanked me for surviving. After the courtroom doors closed behind me, something in my chest cracked open, not in pain, but in release. It wasn't over. Not really. The scars didn't vanish because a judge said they mattered. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to hide anymore. For the first time, I wasn't just a survivor. I was someone who had been believed. They sentenced Daddy to 30 years. Caleb got 15. Mama didn't come to the trial. She never visited me, never wrote. In time, I stopped wondering why. I stayed at the women's shelter for another month before Diane sat me down with a warm smile and said, "Mary, there's someone I'd like you to meet." That afternoon, I walked into the living room of a modest white house with flowers blooming along the walkway and the scent of cornbread floating in from the kitchen. A tall man with kind eyes stood up from his armchair. Beside him, a woman in a soft yellow dress reached out and took my hand. "Mary," she said gently, "we're the Reeds. You're welcome here, if you'd like to stay." I had never seen a family table set for more than one, never heard the sounds of gentle laughter during dinner, or felt arms wrap around me without expecting anything in return. But in that house, I did. Thomas and Helen Reed didn't treat me like I was broken. They didn't ask for details. They just gave me a room with clean sheets, a small bookshelf, and a window that faced the sunrise. For the first few weeks, I barely spoke. Helen would leave breakfast on the table, a fresh flower in a little jar beside my plate. Thomas would knock on my door before dinner and say, "No pressure. Mary, we'd love your company." And some nights I went, some nights I didn't, but they never stopped inviting me. Eventually, I started going to school again, a new school in a nearby town, where no one knew my name or my story. It was terrifying and freeing. I joined the library club. I started writing poems. I learned how to bake apple pie with Helen one rainy afternoon. I taught Charlie, my crooked-tailed cat, how to sit on command, sort of. And slowly, I began to rebuild. One Sunday, while walking back from the store with Thomas, I looked up at him and asked, "Why did you and Helen take me in?" He looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Because you're a child, Mary, and every child deserves a safe home. It hit me then just how foreign those words had once sounded to me. A safe home, a place without locks on bathroom doors, without bruises hidden under sleeves, without shame. I still had nightmares. Still flinched when someone closed a door too fast. But now, I had a light to walk toward. One night, I found Helen in the kitchen, quietly crying as she read through a letter. She looked up and said, "It's from another girl, a survivor like you. She heard about your testimony." I hadn't realized the news had spread. Apparently, the local paper had written a story. A girl saved from abuse, a brave voice in court. My name wasn't mentioned, but people knew, and some of them were starting to speak up too. Helen handed me the letter. It was messy, tear-streaked, and full of pain, but at the bottom, it said, "Because of you, I think I can tell the truth." That's when I knew what happened to me wasn't just about me. Telling the truth wasn't only survival, it was a lifeline. The years that followed weren't easy, but they were mine. I grew up in the Reed household, like a garden that had once been choked by weeds slowly, cautiously, but steadily. They never rushed me, never expected me to get over anything. They simply gave me space to breathe, to cry, to grow. When I turned 16, Helen gave me a typewriter. "You've got stories inside you," she said, "and the world needs to hear them." That night, I sat by the window and wrote my first full page. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't fiction. It was a letter. To the 12-year-old me, to the girl in the bathtub, to the girl who thought she would die before anyone believed her. That letter turned into pages. Pages turned into essays. By the time I graduated high school, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to help girls like me. Girls who had been silenced. Girls who had survived. With Thomas and Helen's support, I applied to college, a small women's college near Tallahassee. I studied social work, trauma counseling, and eventually advocacy. I worked part-time at a shelter for abused women and children, quietly at first, then more boldly. I wasn't just trying to heal myself anymore. I was building something for others. The day I graduated, Diane was there. She wore a lavender dress and held a single daisy. "You did it," she whispered as she hugged me. "I always knew you would." I kept in touch with Detective Sarah Fields, too. She invited me to speak at training seminars for officers who needed to understand the signs of abuse. Not everyone gets a Diane. I told them, sometimes you have to be the one who knocks on the door. In my late 20s, I founded a nonprofit in Seaside, Florida Safe Haven Outreach. It started as a single rented office space with 2 chairs and a box of tissues. By the time I was 40, we had a full team of counselors, legal advisors, and volunteers. We provided housing, therapy, legal help, and most importantly, belief. We believed the girls. We believed the women. We never asked, "Why didn't you leave?" We asked, "How can we help you live?" I received letters, so many letters. Some from girls who read my story in local papers or heard me speak. Some from women in their 60s who had carried secrets for a lifetime. One came from a woman who simply wrote, "Because you stood up, I found the courage to speak, and every time I read one, I'd cry. Not because I was sad, but because I had once believed I was nothing more than what they had done to me, and now I knew better. There were hard days still, anniversaries that made my hands shake, dreams that brought the sound of the door creaking back into my ears. But I wasn't alone. I had Charlie, old and grumpy by then, always curled at the foot of my bed. I had friends, I had purpose, and when I walked past the mirror each morning, I didn't see a victim anymore. I saw Mary Johnson, a woman who had walked through fire and lit a path for others behind her. I was 54 the day I got the letter. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. I nearly tossed it in the trash, but something about the handwriting caught my eye, rigid, all capital letters, like someone pressing too hard on every stroke. Inside was a short note, barely 10 words, Caleb's being released. Thought you should know, a friend. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it neatly and set it down beside my cup of tea. It had been decades since I last saw Caleb's face, last heard his voice, thick with mockery and threat. In my mind, he had never aged. He remained that smug teenager who lived off cruelty and power. But time had passed. He would be a man in his 60s now. I called Sarah Fields, long retired, but still sharp as a tack. She sighed when she heard the news. They let him out early on good behavior. I could practically hear the bitterness in her voice. He's back in town, staying with a cousin near Pensacola. I thanked her and hung up. For days, I wrestled with it. I was safe. I had rebuilt my life. Did I really want to look back again? But part of me knew I couldn't fully heal if I let that shadow linger in silence. So I wrote Caleb a letter, not because he deserved it, but because I did. I know you're out now. I don't care where you go or what you do. I want you to know that you didn't break me. You tried. You tried with fists and words and things no child should have to survive. But I did. I'm still here. And you're just a man who couldn't carry his father's cruelty without becoming a mirror of it. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine, because I won't let you live in my mind 1 second longer than you already have. I mailed it to the address Sarah gave me. No return address, no signature, just truth. A month later, Diane and I took a drive through my old town. The house was gone, torn down years ago. In its place stood an empty lot, weeds growing high through broken stones and bricks. I stood at the edge of the road and stared at where the bathroom used to be, where the tub once sat, where a little girl once begged her father and brother to stop. And I whispered softly, "You didn't win." Diane squeezed my hand. "You ready to go?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, I think I am. I'm 79 years old now. My hands are softer, lined with time, and my hair's gone silver. I sit on my porch here in Seaside, Florida, watching the waves roll in like they've got all the time in the world. Sometimes I think, so do I. There are mornings when I still wake from dreams that take me back to that old bathtub, when water isn't just water, and the walls feel like they're closing in. But then I open my eyes, and I see the sunrise over the Gulf. I hear the breeze brushing against the sea oats, and I remember I made it out. I've spent the last 50 years making sure other girls, women, survivors of any age know they're not alone, that their pain matters, that their stories matter. Safe Haven, Outreach, the nonprofit I founded, now helps hundreds of families every year, and I still volunteer there once a week, mostly just listening. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing we can do for someone, listen. A few years ago, a girl named Amelia came into our program. 14, hair chewed at the ends, quiet, like I once was. She wouldn't talk to anyone until one day she saw a framed newspaper clipping in our hallway. It was my story, the one I told in court so many years ago. She pointed to it and whispered, "She looks like me." I bent down, took her hand, and said, "She was you, and now she's still here. That day." Amelia smiled, just a little. It reminded me that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it begins as a whisper in a quiet room. Looking back, I don't hate my past, not anymore, because it shaped me. It taught me how strong silence can be and how much stronger truth is. I could have let them win, could have let the shame eat me alive, but I didn't. Instead, I told my story, and I kept telling it again and again until my voice stopped shaking, until other voices joined mine, and now we're a chorus. If you're listening to this now, and your heart feels heavy if you've carried a wound that no one else could see, please know this: you are not broken. You are not dirty. You are not to blame. What happened to you does not define you, but what you choose to do with your pain that can define generations. Let your story be heard, even if your voice trembles, even if no one believed you before. Believe yourself now. That's where it begins. If this story moved you, or if you've ever carried a silent pain, I want to invite you to do two things. Leave a comment below. Your words might give someone else the courage to speak. And please subscribe to this channel so we can continue sharing real stories that heal, empower, and remind us that even in the darkest moments, we are never truly alone. Thank you for listening to mine. With all my heart,